Hello. Welcome back to the Space School, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we're going to see what would have happened had Plo Koon, ranking member on the High Council, trained the Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano. With Anakin not taking Ahsoka, does he get another apprentice, or does he stay solo for the duration of the Clone Wars? And how does Ahsoka's story change the future of the Jedi Order? Before we begin this story, let's smash that like button, try and shoot for 2,000 likes in the first 24 hours, and I will release What If Luminara unduly trained Anakin Skywalker. This is a video you definitely don't want to miss. We're also getting for 50,000 subscribers, so join the Space School if you be a part of our incredible journey together. If you have ideas for videos, leave them down below. I do read all the comments, but I don't do crossovers. And one last thing, if you want to support the channel, check out the Patreon, Twitch, and community Discord. Special shout out to George Story, Benjamin Wells, and Gort for being Grand Tier supporters on the Patreon, and Jay Hoffman, Icy Raptor, and War Pigman 308 as Master Tier supporters on our Patreon. Thank you all for supporting the channel. You guys are helping fund massive videos in the future, and if you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, watch to the end of the video, and I will tell you how. Our story begins a decade after Jedi Master Plo Koon brought a young Targutis, or Force-sensitive girl, into the Jedi Temple. The girl's name was Ahsoka Tano, and she was extremely talented. As she grew up inside of the temple, she rose to the ranks of her classes. She was an exceptional student, and she was well acquainted with Plo Koon. Being so close to the Kel Dor Jedi was a high honor. Plo Koon was greatly respected throughout the halls of the Jedi Temple. He was one of the most powerful Jedi in generations, and he was incredibly quiet and modest about it. He was the only Jedi to ever beat Master Yoda in a duel, and he sat on the High Council. Plo had been a High Council member for years, with his lifetime position on the High Council, but no one would ever know because he sat glued to his seat quietly listening, without ever speaking unless he really needed to. Plo's connection to the Force was intimate, and he was the closest of any Jedi inside of the Order to being a vessel of the Force. He was a powerful being, but the modesty and patience behind him was inspiring to the Jedi. Plo Koon was an incredible Jedi with a gentle soul, and even more so, of a being. The Clone Wars had just begun, and the galaxy was on edge. War was crawling across the galaxy, and the galaxy was drawing the lines of conflict. Some would pick their sides, and others, like Mandalore, would find themselves inside a zone of peace. At the same time, the peacekeepers of the galaxy reacted to the beginning of the galactic conflict. The Clone Wars began at the Battle of Geonosis, and from there was no turning back. Plo Koon was one of hundreds of Jedi who showed up at the arena on Geonosis to save 2 Jedi and 1 Senator from the Geonosians. After the Jedi showed up, the clones arrived, and there was no looking back from there. The Jedi were now involved in a galactic conflict. They of course could pull out of the conflict, but the Council decided to keep themselves active in the war as leaders. Though there was a time of excitement inside of the Jedi Temple, another class of younglings were becoming Padawans. While the Council had its own intentions, there were several Jedi being dispatched, and Grand Master Yoda made it ever so clear that the Council should give the Jedi's chosen one his own apprentice. While members like Mace Windu disagreed with the notion, the Council ultimately decided it was for the best of young Skywalker to have an apprentice, even if he hadn't formally requested for one. Yoda originally thought that selecting an overly rambunctious Jedi like Ahsoka Tano would be a good choice for Anakin, but Mace Windu expressed that the boy wouldn't be able to train Ahsoka the way she needed to be trained. Anakin would only drag her down, and so the Council needed to pick a Jedi that would be better, more mature, as a selection for Anakin. There was a young Eridonian Zabrak Jedi by the name of Gakar Crow, and he was one of the closest to the top of his class. Gakar was very much so a Jedi of the Code, and being such a Jedi meant he was very reserved, obedient, and focused all the time. It also meant that there was a chance that he and Skywalker wouldn't get along, as the Council then realized that they needed to figure out what to do with another student of theirs. She was an accelerated student, and she was at the top of her class by the age of 13, already ready to become an apprentice. While she was so young, she was ready, and from the corner of the council chambers a deep voice rose as Plo Koon told them that he would take little Ahsoka as his apprentice. The council whipped their heads around. Plo was the one who brought Ahsoka into the temple. He found her on her homeworld, and then she and him already had an established connection to one another. Plo and Ahsoka would rekindle every so often, but they didn't spend a lot of time with each other other than that. Plo would be able to go down below and find his new apprentice, Ahsoka, and she would be extremely overthrilled to be Plo's apprentice, while Gakar would be sent out to the planet Christophsis to meet with his new master. Plo Koon was obviously thrilled to have a new apprentice. He would immediately take little Ahsoka and prepare her for what she would have to face on the front lines. She would be introduced to the 104th Legion, and Ahsoka would have a lot of new faces to get used to, and even more so, her role. A Padawan would rank higher than most of the clones within a Legion, and with the rank of Commander, meant that Ahsoka would have to be ready and mature enough to lead her men. But the men also had to trust her. They were programmed to trust her, but she absolutely could not fail them. Plo Koon would have to instill immense levels of trust in his apprentice, and with the Clone Wars raging on, it wouldn't be long before Ahsoka and Plo would be sent away to take care of a massive vessel that had been reportedly immobilizing Republic fleets and destroying them. On Christophsis, Anakin would meet his apprentice for the first time, and he would be very indifferent to begin with. Anakin and G'Kar would have a rocky start, and Anakin would quickly pass off as new student to interact with Captain Rex, the leading clone of the 501st. Obi-Wan and Anakin would have a deep discussion about what it meant to be a teacher to a student, and why it was so important for a Jedi to be a guide for their student. Obi-Wan expressed to his former apprentice that teaching was meant to be a joy, and how Obi-Wan believed that Anakin would make a fine teacher to whichever student he took under himself. Anakin would eventually have to be one-on-one with his apprentice. While Anakin was a natural leader, he never realized that he too was a natural teacher. Anakin was able to save his apprentice and himself from multiple occasions as the two Jedi went behind enemy lines to destroy a shield generator to save the clone army. Anakin and G'Kar were able to help the Republic find victory on Christophsis, and while Anakin was a bit concerned with G'Kar's inability to think for himself, he was a bright young Zabrak, and though he was close to the code. Anakin personally thought that G'Kar would make a better apprentice for Obi-Wan, but considering he had to train him, he figured he might as well make the best of the situation. G'Kar wouldn't be the most entertaining apprentice, and he'd also be the least adventurous apprentice. This lack of excitement made Anakin feel a bit disassociated from his student. He really couldn't take it to him in a personal way. Though G'Kar was quick to respond and extremely impressionable, Anakin would have an easy time instructing him, almost too easy of a time doing so. For Anakin, it almost felt like the Council assigned G'Kar to him so that they could keep a close eye on him. While this was an irrational thought, especially because Anakin had no real reason to distrust the Council at this point, Anakin and G'Kar would be sent on a mission elsewhere in the galaxy, while at the same time Plo Koon and Ahsoka would be dispatched into deep space, searching for a mystery ship. They would be on the trail, but for the moment, Ahsoka and Plo would spend time aboard their vessel. The Jedi Star Cruiser had a practice and training room. Plo was a bit rusty. While every so often he would fill in for Master Yoda for the youngling training, Master Plo hadn't trained his own student or an apprentice in decades, so he began with a simple regiment for Ahsoka. Plo and Ahsoka would practice saber techniques. It was a bit simplistic, but it was essential to the training of a Jedi Padawan. While Plo's teaching was a bit more foundational, it would be the right foundation for a little rebel like Ahsoka. Plo knew Ahsoka had a rebellious and even obnoxious tendencies. She was quite impressive for her age, but it didn't mean that she could just get away with being so rambunctious. With Plo, there would be an immediate hierarchy for Ahsoka to fall in line with, because Plo, while being a renowned Jedi Master, would not go easy on Ahsoka, especially with how much he really did care for her. Being the one who found her and having the privilege to also train her, Plo would make her work to excel in her training. Plo knew what it would take to produce a qualified student. He'd done so with quite a few students in his time, and while he was prideful of their success, he was modest in his own respect, and he truly believed that every apprentice would challenge him as a teacher, to be a better teacher than he was with the previous student. It wasn't a disrespect to the former student of his, but it was a truth in the saying that teachers learn from their students. Every teacher had to be open to learning and failing, because failure is always where the most is learned. Ahsoka was already impressive as she moved around the small training facility inside of the Jedi Cruiser. While not every Venator-class Star Destroyer had a training room or training facilities for the Jedi, Venators with the title of Jedi Cruiser were outlined with the basic necessities to train a student. Ahsoka here would be lined up against clone troopers with their weapons set to stun, and against training droids, which were just a little easier. While the more formidable opponent would be the clones, Ahsoka would have to push herself to the limit to succeed. Plo figured that since he had never had a clone army before, and since they were traveling through hyperspace, he might as well allow them to train with Ahsoka. The clones certainly didn't mind using Ahsoka as practice fire. They hadn't exactly warmed up to her yet, though it was training for both of them, and it was also a trust exercise for the two of them. While most of the clones hadn't really warmed up to any of the Jedi yet, this was still the getting used to, your superior time frame for the clones. And while the clones felt lucky to serve with Plo Koon because of his rank on the Jedi Council, they would soon learn to truly appreciate the Jedi that they served with. For now, though, they were playing some game of cat and mouse with a super ship that could easily ruin all of their lives. Plo and Ahsoka continued training, and then it would become a movement into a sparring version of training. When Plo pushed his students, he made sure that they were pushed to their limits. The sparring match would begin with a 1 versus 1 against himself. While Plo wouldn't go as hard as on Ahsoka, as a master of Form 5, he would already be a tough duelist to fight against because of being such a peaceful Jedi with such an aggressive form of saber style. It made him a terrifying opponent. Plo would enter the sparring arena to face down Ahsoka as she ignited her green lightsaber. As she swung at Plo aggressively using her new lightsaber form, Ahsoka was going from Form 1 to Form 4. All Padawans learned how to use Form 1, but then the Jedi would eventually transition out of Form 1 into their own choice of lightsaber form. For Ahsoka, she would choose Form 4. She was trying to use it against Plo. Her master moved backwards as he parried every single one of her strikes without flinching. Plo blocked a strike as he pushed his blade against her, telling her that she needed to have more patience. She needed to use her blade as if it was the life and death of another, not a weapon. Plo raised his blade as blue illuminated his face. Ahsoka ran forward at her master, as he sidestepped her and looked down at her as he sheathed his lightsaber. Ahsoka looked up and saw clones running towards her. Ahsoka got to her feet and deflected stun rounds as the clones made their push against her. Ahsoka jumped back and forth as she used all of her skill she had, but it still wasn't enough as she was stunned and fell to the ground. Plo Koon walked over and pulled her up onto his lap. As he got down onto the floor, he shook her lightly and she awoke. She powdered her face and Plo Koon told her,
"Ready yourself, Ahsoka. Always get back up. You will eventually get to where you want to be. You just have to keep trying."
Ahsoka smiled as she jumped up. Plo stood to his feet as Ahsoka ignited her lightsaber and threw her blade towards Master Plo. As he used the Force to throw her off an attack, Plo turned around without igniting his lightsaber. Ahsoka moved in as she proudly swung her blade, using her speed to reach him. Plo Koon staggered back and back again as she swung, missing each and every strike as he grabbed her hand and pulled her lightsaber forward as he bopped the back of his hand against her stomach as she rolled forward. Ahsoka jumped up as she struck her blade at Plo as he ignited his lightsaber to deflect her strikes. Plo was quick and gentle as Ahsoka tried harder and harder. Plo rolled around as the clones began to push into the room. Ahsoka would falter again. Plo would get her back up and make her go again, and again, and again. Ahsoka would get tired and even more tired from trying so hard, but Plo made sure that she would be inspired to succeed. Plo pushed Ahsoka harder and harder, but it would be Ahsoka who grew the most. After her training, Ahsoka would sit down on the ground as she tried to catch her breath. Plo looked at the clones and thanked them for all their time and their dedication to her training. They all saluted Plo as they turned around and looked at Ahsoka, who was catching her breath, as they left. Plo Koon told her,
"You've done well, little Ahsoka. It won't be long until you become the Jedi you know you can be. Keep doing what you are doing, and have patience. Get some rest. This is only the beginning."
For Ahsoka, she needed to find herself some rest. She would need her strength for the future. She had done so well, getting better each time she fought and sparred with Plo and the clones. But Plo let her know that this was only the beginning. Of course, being a Jedi Council member would be hard, but little did she realize the kind of master that Plo Koon was, and little did she realize how he would train her. The training would be brutal, and it would continue to be as such, but Ahsoka sauntered her way back to her quarters and fell into a deep sleep. Plo Koon, on the other hand, would stay in the training bay and meditate. On the other side of the Outer Rim, Anakin was working with his student Gakar, who was still warming up to Skywalker. There was a lot the two Jedi needed to unpack, especially about their bond. Though G'Kar was 15, he was the average age for a Jedi Padawan, not quite the early bloomer that was Ahsoka, though Anakin believed that if he dug into G'Kar enough, he would get the Jedi to come out of his shell and rise above that which he had already become. Sure, it was a bit of a long shot, but he knew he might as well.
Come on, G'Kar. Let go. Feel, don't think.
Yes, Master.
Remember, the code is a guideline, not a way of life. You need to free yourself to be the Jedi you want to be. Now, come at me again. This time, feel the Force. Don't think about it. Trust yourself.
Okay, I'm ready.
Good. Begin.
Yes, Master.
Much like Plo, Anakin would regiment G'Kar with intense training, some of which being sparring against Anakin himself, and other pieces of it being training with the droids and of course the clones as well. Anakin's fleet was stationed outside of an important planet to make sure the planet was well defended from the Separatists. The Republic didn't have the numbers early in the war to keep up with the Separatist forces, and so they were spread very thin. No one could abandon a post, or it could cost the entire Republic. And while Anakin and G'Kar were getting well acquainted with one another through tough training, Plo Koon's fleet came out of hyperspace. They arrived outside of a red planet as they saw the shadow of a massive cruiser move across the front of a planet. Plo Koon knew this would take everything as the ships went into high alert. This would be the fight of their lives. Ahsoka ran to the bridge as Plo and the crew watched as a massive EMP ray shot out of the massive ship as it slammed into the Jedi fleet. Alarms began to ring as the ships lost all their power. Plo told his men,
"Get to the escape pods and evacuate the ship!"
He then places a hand on Ahsoka's shoulder as the men began running towards the escape pods as they all passed the two Jedi standing in the middle of the command deck. Plo told Ahsoka,
"To lead, one must be willing to be the last to escape. It is our risk, but also our respect to our men. As Jedi, we must value their lives above our own, and we must make sure that is completely apparent to them."
The clone troopers ran down into their respective escape pods as they shot out into space. Plo, Ahsoka, and a couple other clones got into their own escape pod as they also shot off into space. The fleet was immediately destroyed as Plo and Ahsoka watched from their escape pod. Though there was an issue. Their pod was hit by debris when they escaped the Venator, and now they had no power. The five inside needed to find a way to get the power back on. Being inside of an escape pod would warrant a bit of claustrophobia, but it would be a great moment for learning. Patience and solitude would be defining characteristics for this lesson, and their time inside of the escape pod would be elongated. Though for the five, it would turn into a game of patience and then into a tantalizing task. Pod hunters would be seen rummaging through the rubble of the ships, and they'd be looking for any escape pods that survived the assault of the Malevolence, and they were immediately dealt with. The clones still inside stood little to no chance, but when the pod hunter came around to the pod with Plo Koon inside, the Jedi Master would step outside of the escape pod to defend his men and his Padawan from the pod hunters. Though this small victory would be remarkable, the two clones and Plo would be in for a lack of rescue. On the other side of the rim, Anakin was currently reporting to the Council that they lost contact with Master Plo's fleet. G'Kar, being the obedient student he was, asked if they could go to save Master Plo. Anakin would deny him the opportunity, but G'Kar would never interrupt Anakin or the council members in the middle of their meeting. Though there would be more issues on the other side of the galaxy to beset Plo Koon and those under his command, as they watched the massive supership crawl its way towards them. The ship was carrying Count Dooku and General Grievous. As a massive ship climbed around the wreckage and found itself near Plo Koon's escape pod, it was dragged into the hangar bay with the tractor beam. Plo Koon was a ranking Jedi Master, and General Grievous was too prideful to not kill the Jedi in one-on-one combat. While Dooku would never agree with this, Grievous did it without Dooku's. The escape pod would drop into the hangar bay after being pulled in by the tractor beam. The three clones inside of the ship fell out of the escape pod while Ahsoka dropped down too. The clones and Ahsoka were weakened, and while Plo, being the oldest by centuries, had to be the strongest. Plo heard the sound of clanking of battle droids and he knew he had to get the clones and his Padawan out of the way. Plo would help the two clones up, the two clones that were in space with him, as they started making their way towards a corridor. They turned around and they saw hundreds of battle droids walking towards them. Plo used the Force to close the hall doors as he turned around and saw more droids coming from the adjacent hangar bay. Plo saw one way to get his men into a safe space, as he used the Force to pull the cover off a ventilation shaft about 20 feet up in the air.
Come with me. I'm going to lift you up into that ventilation shaft. Get to safety. I'll be with you shortly. I promise I'll get you all out of here alive. Move quickly.
Plo then lifted up all 3 clones, and then Ahsoka, as he turned around and looked at the droids coming his way. Because the droids were getting closer and closer, their weapons began to raise, as they came to imprison the Jedi. Plo Koon threw Ahsoka up into the ventilation shaft as she picked up the cover and lodged it back into place as Plo Koon turned around, igniting his lightsaber. Plo ran towards the droids and used the Force to throw the droids from their feet as he made a push against them. Plo Koon moved back and forth as he made his power known. Though Plo was so focused, he didn't realize who was making his way down the hangar bay. Plo, for the first time, used Electric Judgment by accident as he electrocuted several battle droids, and then he saw Magna Guards and General Grievous. The Magna Guards were sent forward as Plo steadied himself into attack position. His blade moved out and back as he clashed with the Magna Guards as they circled around him. General Grievous moved towards Plo as Plo parried back and then jumped back over the Magna Guards and faced down all 5 opponents. Plo Koon used the Force as he lifted up all 4 Magna droids, crushing them with the power of the Force. Plo then looked at Grievous. He was getting a bit tired, being in space and now here fighting off the battle droids and the Magna Guards was a bit tiring. General Grievous knew that Plo was getting tired and he knew that he had to also be at his best. Plo was also hoping that the clones and Ahsoka would be able to get to communication off of the ship and to the Republic fleet elsewhere in the galaxy. Plo Koon steadied himself as General Grievous lunged at him. Plo was quick to deflect as he moved around the droid general. Plo Koon was quick on his feet and steady with his movements. Grievous was ready to claim the kill of his first council member as he swung ferociously at Plo. General Grievous was incredibly quick, but Plo Koon, with hundreds of years of experience, was moving quickly to make a fool out of the droid general. Having been the only Jedi recorded to beat Master Yoda, he wouldn't just let this technological terror beat him in combat. As their battle lit up the hangar bay, Grievous released all 4 of his arms as he moved with swiftness and prowess, trying to land the killing blow. Plo was able to block every strike as he parried every other. Plo Koon was quick as he began to dismantle the droid general. He cut off one of the hands of General Grievous as he pulled the fallen lightsaber into his hand with the Force as he deflected the droid general with his other hand. Ahsoka watched from the vents as the clones got into contact with someone outside of the star system. It was a tough shot, but if they could get help from the Jedi, they might have a chance to escape this monstrous ship. Plo Koon danced back and forth with the general as Ahsoka watched in awe as Plo Koon flawlessly moved against General Grievous. Before Grievous knew it, he lost another hand, and then he was cut across the chest. Plo Koon watched as Grievous fell on his back as his breathing began to rapidly pick up. The creature that was General Grievous now was struggling to breathe, and even more so, struggling to exist. Plo then felt a familiar presence as he looked down the hallway and saw Dooku walking towards him. Plo Koon knew that Dooku was a terrific duelist. Plo also knew that if he was fully rested, he'd have a good shot at Dooku, but Plo was exhausted. He was able to kill General Grievous, but he didn't know if he would be able to beat Dooku right here and right now. The two were former friends, but this was not the time yet. Plo turned around and lifted the ventilation shaft door off the hinges as he ran and jumped up into it, closing the door behind him. Ahsoka was waiting there for her master as they pulled the cover back over and began the travel looking for the troopers. Plo would ask why she hadn't gone with the clones, and she expressed to him that she wanted to make sure that he was alright. Plo then expressed that the next time would be better if she stayed with them. That it would be alright, that he would be alright, and that her troopers needed to trust that she would be there for them, that they could rely on her. While he appreciated the fact that she waited for him, he saw this as a teaching moment for her and her relationship with her troops. When Dooku got over the General Grievous, he looked down at the leading general as he died on the ground like an animal. Dooku growled as he whipped himself around and got into contact with the ship commander, telling the droid to put the ship into high alert. The signal the clones sent got to the people in the galaxy. The Jedi would know of this malevolence, and they would know that the best opportunity to destroy the super ship would be to cripple the EMP weapons on the side of it and knock out the ship from control. Plo finally returned to his men, as one of the troopers said.
We got into contact with the Republic.
Good. Then now we rest. Gather our strength and await for our chance to escape.
It wouldn't be a long time before they had the opportunity to escape the superweapon. The Malevolence would die today. As the five found a place to lay low, away from the droids and away from Dooku, they were relieved when, within the coming hours, they heard the ship go into high alarms, as 2 Republic fleets came out of hyperspace to fight the Malevolence. Without the droids knowing that their location was revealed, they were distraught to find themselves stuck between 2 Republic fleets. They wouldn't be able to flag down both fleets because of their locations and how far away they were from the ship. The EMP blast wouldn't be able to reach all the way out to the corresponding fleets, though the fleet of Obi-Wan and the fleet of Anakin would deploy all their Y-wing bombers, escorted by several wings of Torrent fighters to protect the bombers. Anakin and his apprentice, Gakar, take separate vehicles as they made their move on the Malevolence. During this time, Plo Koon sat quietly inside of a hiding location meditating, making sure that his presence and his Padawan's presence were safe from Dooku. He didn't want Dooku finding either of them. And because the day was so long, he wanted to make sure that everyone escaped alive. Though there was a sense of relief, the alarms meant that the Republic was here to stop the ship, but also drag the survivors out of the massive supership. Plo Koon awoke from his meditation. His men were antsy, and so was Ahsoka, but they knew that they had their shot once the ship started to rattle, and the bombers eventually landed the direct hit on the EMP weapon. The entire ship became disabled, as the crew inside of the ship tried to put out raging fires in hangar bays and different corridors. Dooku was beyond upset that this happened. This ship was a fleet killer, and with only a few successful missions, it was already losing. This was such a waste of resources, and with General Grievous being dead, this would be a truly costly day for the CIS. Plo would get his men into the hangar bay, and it would be there where he encountered Count Dooku again. While Plo was able to rest up, he knew that he would have to take on Dooku head-on. It was his only option until the Republic rescued any of them. Plo told Ahsoka that no matter what, that her mission was to make sure the troops got off the ship alive. Ahsoka tried to speak up as Plo raised his hand and stepped forward. Dooku stood surrounded by thousands of battle droids. He was unbelievably pissed. The 2 most important factors to the Separatist plot were dead, or being destroyed. Dooku needed to claim a victory here and now for the Separatists. If he could capture Plo, that would be a great bargain against the Republic, but if he couldn't, then he would have to kill him. Dooku stood silently as his lightsaber hung down beside him, as Plo looked at the Sith Lord. Plo tried to speak, but Dooku didn't seem to be the one for conversations at the moment. It was a shame that the 2 Jedi had to cross paths like this. They used to be such great friends. It was always a shame when a Jedi left the Order, but this one hurt more than the others. Probably because Plo and Dooku were close. Dooku stepped forward as Plo ignited his blade. He knew Dooku's fighting style, and he knew it would take the best of him to beat Dooku. And while Plo had beat Yoda, Dooku never bested his former master, so Plo did have that on his side. Plo steadied himself as he got into his attack position as he waited for Dooku to make his move. Dooku moved in as Plo steadied himself around and found patience within himself as he parried Dooku as he moved back and forth. Plo needed to be strong and tall and stall long enough for the clone reinforcements to arrive. Plo and Dooku moved back and forth. Ahsoka was getting antsy, but she was also extremely nervous watching her master take on the Sith Lord. Blue and red bounced off the walls as the 2 duelists met with each other's blades as they focused on their assault on one another. Plo was being patient. While Dooku kept looking for the opportunity to strike, all of a sudden there were 3 LAATs bursting into the hangar bay, shooting at the droids. As one of them landed and General Kenobi jumped out, with a bunch of his clone troopers behind him. Kenobi ignited his lightsaber as he jumped into attack against Dooku. Plo felt much better with the added assistance as he confidently moved into a more aggressive approach. He obviously knew he had to be wary of Count Dooku, but with Kenobi arriving, the combination of Form 3 and Form 5 would be perfect to match and offset the Master Duelist. Though, on the other hand, the clones needed to get some assistance. The hangar bay was full of droids, and the clones were outnumbered. Though Ahsoka was a great assistance to her men, she was still a Padawan, and it would take some time for her to pick up on great battle tactics. Though she figured out that if the clones shot at the ceiling, there were some large rafters that would fall, and separate the droids from the clones. It would also isolate Dooku from the droid army. Cody and the rest of the men aimed up at the ceiling as they started to open fire, and the massive metallic rafters began to fall down. Dooku and Plo clashed back and forth. Dooku swung as Kenobi blocked. The three were intensely fighting with one another. All of a sudden, a yellow starfighter would fly into the hangar bay as a Jedi Knight jumped out, and his astromech piloted the ship forward. Anakin landed next to the two Jedi as he ignited his blade and joined the fight against Dooku. Dooku was a great duelist, but this was even a bit much for him. The clones then made their push forward as they were separated from the droids. They set their guns to stun as Ahsoka told them to. Plo moved around Dooku as he blocked blades and swung at his lightsaber around his back. Plo then parried Dooku as Kenobi and Skywalker moved to encircle Dooku. The clones then opened fire, shooting into the back of Dooku, stunning him immediately, Wolf being the one to land the perfect shot. Plo would call for his apprentice to get Dooku's lightsaber, as Kenobi and Plo got the stunned Dooku inside of the LA-AT. Anakin got inside of another LA-AT as R2 piloted his starfighter. G'Kar was flying outside in a dogfight with the droids, and the clones who were with him. The three LA-ATs took off and into the flak. They flew with the Jedi and their prisoner, now in shackles and stow. It wouldn't be long until the Jedi arrived inside of the Venator, and put Dooku inside of a prison cell. Another Republic fleet would be deployed on the Malevolence as Dooku, Plo Koon, Ahsoka, and Kenobi would return back to Coruscant, as Anakin and G'Kar finished off the Malevolence, crushing the massive supership. Back on Coruscant, Dooku would be taken as prisoner, and he would be interrogated. This was bad for Palpatine for two reasons. For one, Dooku being captured meant that the public view on the Jedi would shift from blame game to some praise for their capture, though the public hadn't started blaming the Jedi yet. It also meant that the Separatists lost a lot of power. With the Malevolence being destroyed, the death of Grievous, and the capture of Count Dooku, this war wasn't looking favorable for Palpatine's great plan to come to fruition. While the Jedi would obviously try to take custody over Dooku, the Republic would be the one that kept him in prison. Dooku wouldn't give up his secrets, and the Separatists would be vying for his release, though the war effort would have completely changed. With the exception of a few battles, the Republic was taking hold of the Separatists while their leadership was weak, and began targeting important systems to the droid army. Palpatine, being the genius that he was, knew he had to do something. Anakin had no distrust for the Jedi. The public view of the Jedi was positive because of their ability to take hold of the galactic situation, and the biggest issue for Palpatine was turning all of this against the Jedi, and he knew how to do it. The droid army was leagues larger than the clone army, and the best way to get the Jedi out of the positive view was make sure that they began to lose, and lose a lot. Sidious would get in touch with the few Separatist leaders that were still in power out across the galaxy, as he informed them to make a massive push against the Republic, to put the Jedi on their heels. The Separatists would immediately comply. Inside of the Jedi Temple, Plo Koon was still with his Padawan. She wanted to learn how to be like her master. Plo, being able to survive in space, beating Grievous, and hold his own against Dooku in a short span of time, within the span of about an hour or two, was quite incredible. While surviving in space was something that he could do because of his mask and something that you couldn't really teach, the rest of it was rather important. She wanted to be like him, harness that power. Plo Koon would take his apprentice out into the Jedi Temple garden, where he would begin to teach her the way to achieve this. Ahsoka was confused why they weren't going down into training facilities or training droids or clones. Plo told Ahsoka to look at the tree. So she looked over, as he spoke to her and asked how she thought he was able to best the odds he was faced with. Ahsoka shrugged her shoulders. She assumed it was something that had to do with combative experience, but it wasn't really what she had to say. She just listened to her master after she shrugged her shoulders. Plo Koon explained,
Power isn't the goal you wish to achieve, little Ahsoka. It's the connection with the Force. When we were inside of the Malevolence, I didn't use power. I trusted the Force to guide me. I let it surround me, and I followed the path of the Force. This is what we as Jedi must do to achieve balance, not only within ourselves, but within the Force.
Ahsoka nodded as Plo fell down to his knees and gently asked her,
Join me, little Ahsoka. There's so much to learn about the Force.
Much of the next year and a half, combat would go similarly. The Clone Wars were a vengeful war, and it took the lives of many. While Ahsoka blossomed under Plo Koon, the 104th, now called the Wolf Pack, was one of the most elite units in the Clone Army. They traveled with Plo Koon across the galaxy, liberating the people of the galaxy. Plo Koon having Ahsoka meant he spent time with her inside of the Jedi Temple, where he was often, and with her on the front lines, where he was also often. Because Plo Koon was a High Council member, he was consistently inside of the Jedi Temple. While he could do council meetings from far away, he was one of the few Jedi that was kept inside the Jedi Temple, especially because he had a young Padawan. Though for Anakin and G'Kar, they had to spend a lot of their time on the front lines. The war progressed, and G'Kar became a lot like his master. He was very much like Anakin, and even more so like Qui-Gon. G'Kar wore his robes loose, and his personality was a bit more lenient, and him and Anakin were as tight as they could be. While having an uptight Jedi could be a bit of a challenge for Anakin, he reformed his young Padawan into quite the prodigy. Though the issue for G'Kar was that he wasn't nearly as strong as Skywalker. While Anakin was the chosen one, it was G'Kar's goal to become like his master. Much like his master, he wore dark black robes. Their bond would be increasingly tighter as Anakin and G'Kar spent time with one another across every battlefront. The time would come for Anakin to be dismissed from battle, and it was at the peak of the Clone Wars combat. Because the Separatists used most of their forces at the beginning of the war, they were able to offset the Republic's progress after the defeat of the Malevolence. With the loss of Dooku, Grievous, and the Malevolence, Admiral Trench would act as the leader of the Separatist military operations. Not all the campaigns would be led by him, but his already renowned name would resurge when he pulled a new victory after new victory. On the battlefront, Anakin was pulled from action during the first day of combat on Umbora. The 501st dug their heels in, and they were given a new general. Though there was one big issue. The general assigned to the 501st would be overseeing Captain Rex and Commander G'Kar Crow, this Jedi being Pong Krell. Anakin wasn't exactly thrilled to be removed from combat, but he obeyed the Chancellor, as the Chancellor ordered him to do so. Padawan G'Kar would have to live with the new general, and he would struggle with the adjustment, especially because his general didn't respect him for being with his men on the front lines. G'Kar was beginning to rebel against Krell, and because the young Jedi was not having the uptight behavior of Krell, he would stand up for his men. Krell didn't appreciate this, but he made a plan to trap the Jedi Padawan in combat after the clones captured the airfield. Krell was going to pin the 212th and 501st against one another, and G'Kar was going to lead the charge for the 501st. The stage was set to have the child killed off, so that Krell could continue his operations and crush the clone forces in the progress. The 501st and 212th got interlocked in a battle, and it would take G'Kar realizing that he was fighting his own men to change the scenario. Though the clones of the 212th realized something was awry when there was a Jedi fighting alongside of the 501st. The clones would be heartbroken. G'Kar, on the other hand, would also be broken to his core. He couldn't believe what he had just done. For the clones, they were ready for revenge. G'Kar was ready to do the same thing as the clones. They all rallied up, and they made their move back to the airfield to confront Pong Krell. As the men entered the control room inside of the base of the airfield, as the clones moved around the room, G'Kar made his way between Krell and the window. G'Kar looked at Krell and said,
"You will pay for what you've done. How could you do it? They're your own men. They should be treated with respect, not disposable animals."
Krell just laughed as he ignited his blades as G'Kar lunged at Krell as the massive traitor turned his blades around in circles as he collided with the young Jedi. The clones opened fire as they tried to work with the Jedi Padawan who was trying to help them. G'Kar fought as hard as he could. He was a strong duelist using Form 4 against Krell, but even with Krell deflecting blaster bolts and dueling G'Kar, he was able to disarm the young Jedi as one of his hulking blades slammed into the chest of the young Jedi as G'Kar fell down. The clones were able to take advantage as they began to shoot the back of Krell as the traitorous Jedi fell. Krell fell to his knees as the traitor was then executed by the clones. The clones ran over to G'Kar to see if he was alright, only to find out that he was killed by Krell. The Battle of Umbara was a success for the Republic, but the death of G'Kar would be a heartbreak for his master. Anakin Skywalker, when he found out about the death of his apprentice, was brutally upset. The news reached him, and he didn't say a word to anyone. Anakin was silent. Kenobi would try to talk to his former apprentice, but it would be no use. Anakin was silent as a grave when his apprentice was buried. His rage was bellowing within. Everyone in the High Council would feel it within Anakin. They all attended the service for G'Kar, but none of them could muster the courage to say anything to Skywalker. Kenobi, Plo, and Yoda were the most concerned for Anakin, and when everyone left the memorial figure car, the 3 Jedi Masters stayed and waited with Anakin. Ahsoka was standing next to her master as she felt the pain inside of Anakin. By this point, she was very mature for her age, but she did know her place, and she was afraid to speak up. After Anakin left, Ahsoka would confront her master and ask him about Anakin. Plo had nothing to say. He himself was conflicted. He had a lot to unravel. With Anakin being so unbalanced, he was worried about what could happen to him. Plo didn't know if he could help Skywalker or how he could, but the war was heating up, and he, Kenobi, and Skywalker would all be dispatched across the galaxy to fight on separate battlefronts. Yoda wouldn't be able to help Anakin, and the other 2 Jedi wouldn't have the chance to make an impact on Anakin. His anger and rage would be built so uncontrollably, as he kept the Padawan braid of his former student. Anakin would be placed on the front lines consistently. This wasn't mandated by the Jedi, but the Chancellor was keeping Anakin away from the Jedi as much as possible. The war dragged on longer and longer. Obi-Wan and Anakin didn't get much time to be around each other. Plo and Ahsoka would continue their campaigns against the Separatists. Ahsoka was progressing incredibly fast at this point, and she was closer than ever to becoming a Jedi Knight. Plo and her would be able to spend time away from one another, and Ahsoka was getting better at leading, which meant that she would assume command of the 104th even without Plo being present. Ahsoka was an incredible Jedi Padawan, and Plo was so proud of her for how far she had come since they had first met each other. As the war came closer and closer to an end, Anakin Skywalker was placed on the High Council, but because his student never became a knight, he was not granted the rank of Master on the High Council. This again would distance Anakin from the Council, and he would begin to struggle with everything. The issues would continue when Kenobi was dispatched after having to tell Anakin to spy on the Supreme Chancellor. This was another issue for Anakin because the Chancellor and he were so close. Anakin saw him as a mentor. Anakin felt isolated from the Order, and even more so, he felt the pressures of his secret wife and her pregnancy, because Anakin was beginning to have nightmares of her dying in childbirth. This issue would continue as the Jedi were sent out across the galaxy, and the few council members left behind weren't exactly close to Anakin, especially not the Master of the Order, Mace Windu. While the Jedi Council would continue to neglect Anakin, he would learn that the terrible truth about the Sith, and he would reveal the fact that the Sith Lord was in fact Palpatine. So, the Council would make the move to go and remove Palpatine from power. While the Council was on the way to the Senate, they got into contact with the Jedi Master who was nearby, with a commander who would be able to lead an assault on Cato Neimoidia without her master. Plo Koon was currently using his fighter to wreck through Separatists on the planet of Cato Neimoidia, and he would turn around immediately. Plo Koon learned about Sidious, and he was going to ensure that he took care of Anakin. He was going to go straight to the Senate building to make sure that he wouldn't have any rambunctious decisions. The trip from Cato Neimoidia to Coruscant wouldn't take too long. It was a quick hyperspace jump away, so he would be there by sundown. The 4 Jedi Council members went to confront the Supreme Chancellor, and it would lead to an absolute battle to the death. Plo Koon, who was in hyperspace, could feel the Force being changed out of balance on Coruscant. The time was speeding up, and the heart rates were changing from both sides of the Council chambers and inside of Plo's starfighter. Ahsoka on Cato Neimoidia was cleaning up the seppies. Plo Koon's starfighter exited hyperspace as he pressed the ship past the law speed regulation, as Plo landed his ship down on the bay of the Senate building. Plo had mixed feelings. He was worried about Skywalker, but he waited on the bay, and then he saw a Jedi ship that was there. Plo realized that Anakin had already gotten there, so he ran to the Chancellor's office, where he heard the sound of screaming and lightning. Anxiety shot up Plo's chest as he turned the corner and saw Anakin standing adjacent to Windu and the Chancellor. Plo Koon ran up and placed his shoulder on Skywalker as Palpatine tried to plead his case.
The oppression of the Sith will never return. You have lost.
He must stand trial.
Plo Koon turned Anakin around as he looked into his eyes.
Skywalker, he's the Sith Lord that has been playing both sides of the war. Snap out of it!
Anakin looked at Plo as he lowered his head. Windu raised his blade as Sidious cried out. Anakin gritted his teeth as his hand hovered over his lightsaber. Plo looked down and saw it as he prepared to stop something that Anakin would do. Sidious lay on the ground. He knew that even if Anakin tried to stop him, he didn't have a chance, especially if Plo blocked Anakin. Windu began to swing down as Anakin ignited his blade. A red blade from the corner of the room ignited, and Plo ignited his own blade. Sidious pulled his lightsaber from across the other side of the room and blocked Windu as he stepped up. Plo, on the other hand, blocked Skywalker as he pushed him against the wall. This enraged Skywalker even more, as he turned back and looked at Plo with a quivering lip.
I need him!
Plo matched Anakin's attitude.
Why would you need him? Why would you need the Sith?
Anakin swung his blade around and matched with Plo as their blades screeched across each other. Anakin didn't have a response. Sidious and Windu danced around with their lightsabers in the background. Windu had completely beaten the Sith Lord of the galaxy, and he had lost his advantage because of Anakin. Plo looked at Anakin and asked,
Why would you throw everything away? What can the Sith do that the Jedi cannot?
Anakin's lips quivered. He didn't know what to say as he fell back. Plo spoke up again.
If you don't stand down, then we cannot help Master Windu. Think of everything that we've lost because of the Sith. Millions of civilians, your Padawan, thousands of clone troopers, and the several attempts on the lives of your friends in the Senate.
Anakin paused as he dropped his lightsaber. He looked up at Plo and didn't know what to say. Windu on the other side of the room was dueling with Sidious, and yet again, he bested the Sith Lord in combat. Mace sliced down Sidious as he walked over to Plo and Anakin. He was furious that it came to this. Mace spoke up.
Skywalker, why? Why would you stand up for him?
Anakin didn't know what to say. He looked around as his eyes darted around the room. He was at a loss for words. He himself didn't understand why he acted out like he did, after hearing especially what Plo Koon had to say about who Palpatine really was. Windu spoke up again.
Skywalker.
Plo looked over and said,
Master, give him time. This is a great trouble within him, and I know you can sense it. Let him think on this. I'll take him back to the council chambers.
Windu nodded as Plo put his arm under Anakin and escorted him out of the room. Anakin's heart was so confused, his mind was astray. He didn't know what to do. Anakin walked with Plo. They didn't need to say anything to each other. Anakin understood for the first time that the Jedi really did have his back. Plo was here for him, not for anybody else. While it was certainly a misunderstanding, Plo knew that it wasn't time to interrogate Anakin. He needed to let Anakin get some time to reflect before he addressed the council on what he did. While Plo never knew about the relationship between Padme and Anakin, he did know that Anakin was extremely close to the Chancellor. Plo personally assumed that this was what the issue was. He thought Anakin's closeness with the Chancellor made him second-guess Mace's decision. Plo knew that Anakin wasn't close with Mace. He made sure that the two of them got their space. This also allowed Anakin to realize so much, and most of it was how he almost threw his entire life away for someone that tried to have his wife executed on multiple occasions. Anakin sat down in his seat on the High Council and sat down silently. When he returned to the High Council chambers, he had a lot to mentally unpack. He couldn't believe what he just tried to do. A lot of issue had to be dealt with, and he had so much disbelief of what just happened inside of the Senate building. Anakin began to fear for a demotion. If he was demoted, he might not be able to save Padme's life. It was something that truly terrified him. He sat in tears inside of the council chamber, waiting for Master Plo and Master Windu to return. Plo Koon, on the other hand, waited down below in front of the elevator shaft that went into the High Council. He was waiting for Master Windu to return. It would take hours for Windu to return, mostly because he had to inform the Senate of what had just happened. The Senate had its distrust, but because the Jedi were closing in on victory, it would be up for debate on how the Senate would like to handle the situation. Anakin's tears were wiped away as he looked at Mace and Plo as they entered and sat down quietly. Anakin's stress was building, but then he felt calm and resolved because Mace closed his eyes and rested himself in his seat, as Plo did the same thing. Anakin realized that the situation inside the Senate building was emotional for everyone. Anakin closed his eyes with the other two Jedi and felt some sense of relief. While the dreams of Padme were no longer there, the memories of them remained. But there was no reoccurring dream. It was like the death of Palpatine was the death of fearing Padme's death. While it would take Anakin some time to realize this, it didn't really matter. With the Sith and General Grievous being dead, the Clone Wars were coming to a rapid end. While Mace Windu had his discrepancies with Anakin, he did earn a bit of trust for Anakin, and while it was easier to neglect Anakin, Plo was right. Anakin was acting on his emotion, something he always did. And while Mace had his issues with that, he understood from a certain point of view why that was the case. For the Jedi, with the war coming to a close, would have to appeal to the Senate to not be removed from their power in Coruscant. While the Jedi would have to make a strong case for their own status and power, Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi with the best reputation of the Order, would come forward and even defend the Jedi Order. With Anakin's decision to stand up for the Order, he would earn more trust to the High Council members, and while the Jedi wouldn't be removed from power, Anakin would be welcomed as a Jedi Master on the High Council, though there would be no concern over his children when Padme took them to Naboo, where she would be able to raise them without worry of the Jedi. On the other side of things, Maul would be the very last Sith, along with Dooku, who was still in prison. He would be on the loose, running rampant across Mandalore until Obi-Wan would be sent there. Obi-Wan would achieve victory, and with the Darksaber being his now, he would complete the circle. After beating Maul, he would claim the Darksaber and become the official leader of Mandalore. Obi-Wan's responsibilities would keep him present on Mandalore without having to wage war. Kenobi would lead the planet and do so in memory of his beloved Satine. While Gar Saxon would struggle to serve a Jedi, Gar Saxon would try and lead a resistance against Obi-Wan's regime, but that would fail. For Anakin, he would continue to serve on the Council as a master, but he would continue to keep his marriage secret. And Ahsoka would become a Jedi Knight after a few short years as a Padawan to Plo Koon. For the Jedi, they would have a chance to forever find peace in the galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to George Story, Benjamin Wells, and Jay Hoffman, WarPigman308, Icy Raptor, and Gort for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this so that we can see what if Luminar unduly trained Anakin Skywalker. If you want to see a what if, let me know down below. I do read off comments, but I don't do crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to be a part of our community and support me other ways. If you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, go down below. There is a doc that is listed in the pinned comment. You click on the doc, and you write your name on the doc. It's very simple. Instructions are there. Next lightsaber is being given away in 3 days. That is right, 3 days on July 4th of 2022. And let's talk about the story that we have in front of us. This was actually a really interesting concept to me. I think it certainly could have been longer. And maybe I'll be hard on myself for that, but we do have new voice actors, so kudos to them. Thank you to the voice actors for participating in this. Guys always do a great job bringing these stories to life. It's always fun to bring voice actors into these stories. But for the most part, I think this story capitalizes off some very important details, and that's what I wanted this story to be about. I didn't want it to drag on, and I didn't really want it to. I wasn't shooting to go below an hour, but I think I'm going to be a little bit below an hour, if not just on the marker. But this story is very much so focusing on the main points of Plo and Ahsoka's relationship. There's a couple things that change because of Ahsoka being Anakin's Padawan or being Plo's Padawan. First thing being first, I think Plo Koon would have not been saved by Anakin in this situation because the Jedi that I came up with, Gakar, by the way, Gakar's a new character, so thank you to Spycraft for playing Gakar, and thank you to our other friend for playing the other 3 characters. I'm really excited about having them on a team. Their links are down below, by the way, under the PPT in the description. But I liked the fact that we gave Anakin a new Padawan, and this Padawan was a little bit uptight, and this Padawan had a little bit of a discrepancy with Anakin for, well, let's say being uptight versus not being uptight, and I think that combination actually works really well. I think that would be a really interesting combination for Anakin to have as an apprentice, a Jedi that was uptight, but that would reform themselves to be more like Anakin, because Ahsoka was rambunctious in nature, and that's something that I wanted to focus on in the story. Obviously, in most stories, I usually stick to the characters that are part of the story, regardless of what's going on around them. I usually focus to what's going on in the main story, right? And this story I had to do something different, because you're going to be curious what happens with Anakin, because Anakin is part of the story, and Ahsoka is part of Anakin's story, and I wanted to take advantage of that and talk about that, because there's no real way to just not talk about Anakin in the story. Ahsoka was his Padawan, and there's going to be a lot of interest in what happens to Anakin. Now, it's a shame that G'Kar had to die, but I think it would add a certain level of anger to Anakin. I think it would add a certain level of distrust, and I think it would also make him a little bit more dark-sided. And while I didn't talk about that per se, I wanted you to use your imagination in that. I want you to use your imagination in scenes that I don't talk about. The Clone Wars are, it's a 7-season show. It's a lot of content, and I could talk for hours. I could do, another 2.5 hour long video on this topic regarding the Clone Wars, and regarding Ahsoka and Plo in the Clone Wars, and regarding all these different aspects of the Clone Wars. And that wasn't really what I was going for here. I was kind of going for the main point that George Lucas likes to tell his stories, and it's the main focal points of the story. Act 1, like for example, let's talk about, like, for the prequels, it's Act 1, this very important moment where this kid meets this woman, and he falls in love with her, and he likes her, and all this stuff, but he doesn't get to do anything about it, and he spends 10 years being a Jedi, nothing eventful happens, and then at that 10-year mark, something eventful happens, and then the Clone Wars begin, and at the end of the Clone Wars, another eventful thing happens. And the most eventful things in the story for our characters is the Malevolence story, Anakin and G'Kar and Plo Koon and Ahsoka are having a little bit of training to begin with, so that you know that there's training going on for the student and the master, and also the Malevolence, and then we go to the death of G'Kar on Umbara, and then of course the end of the Clone Wars, which I think is where it all changes after that. Now for Kenobi and Maul, that is all up to your interpretation of what happens there. That's not really up for me to decide. Obviously I can make a part 2, or I can put a miniseries in here. I'm not going to do that, because I think the story really fits the cohesive idea that I wanted to talk about. But I do truly hope you enjoyed this story. This story was pretty fun. I'm very thrilled about the thumbnail. I think the thumbnail is adorable. I know you guys know Plo Koon is one of my favorite characters, and I really try to be fair at this, and this is something I want to cover before I finish this video off, is I know I have my own favorite Jedi, and I'm always trying to make it fair. I really do. It's just hard when you're using characters like Plo Koon and Shaak Ti and Mace Windu and Yoda and Anakin and Obi-Wan. You have these incredible characters, incredible Jedi, and they're just so powerful, and it's unfair. It really is. And I really want to try and make you feel tension in the story. Plo Koon is not a god. He's a Jedi, and he's a very powerful Jedi at that, but I want you to feel the tension in the moment. He could probably beat Dooku on 1-on-1. I think it'd be a very contested match, but him being tired, I don't see him beating Dooku. So I wanted you to feel that tension there, and I don't want you to feel like any character is invincible. That's something that I often try to capture. That everything I try and capture with these stories is these characters aren't invincible, and they're not meant to feel invincible. So by that regard, I do hope you all enjoyed the story. If you did, leave a like down below and slap that like or that subscribe button. Let's hit 30,000 subscribers by the end of July, and maybe I'll do a giveaway for it. But I also might be giving out some stuff too, so that's what a giveaway is, isn't it? Anyways, it's like 4 in the morning, so I gotta get this done before 12. Anyways, guys, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.